rice wine.
Sake?
Either way, we're making it today. Alright, so we're actually making rice wine. Now, some people will call it sake, and that's actually okay too. I used to think that they were completely different things made with very, very different processes, and they can be. Many areas have different types of rice wines, and the only thing that they actually have in common is they're all made using the same type of rice, basically. They do all different kinds of things with them, though. And it's okay. Sake is just Japanese rice wine. Now, there are different levels of sake from the lowest to the highest, and they have various different methods. So, while it's still considered sake, it's not the same as, say, the really high-end stuff, okay? It's very, very different. One major difference that I learned, though, is that rice wine is often distilled, where sake is always just fermented. So there's a little difference. We will not be distilling it today. We've talked about that before. It's illegal where we live. Not going to happen. We just don't do it. But that's not going to stop us from making a fermented rice wine the traditional way. Now, what does the traditional way mean? It means this took far longer to get to this point than I thought it would.
So to start off, you need to have the correct rice. And so for us, we're using a sweet rice.
Yeah, this rice is glutinous or sweet rice. People use it for sushi rice, things like that. If you use regular long grain American style white rice, I've been told that it comes out sour tasting. So we wanted to make it the real way.
This is a short grain rice that, it is my understanding, has a higher level of the fermentable sugars in it.
The starches, yes. Rice doesn't actually contain sugars, and this is where it's difficult to make rice wine. Rice wine is really more like a beer.
Which leads us to important ingredient number 2, and that's the type of yeast.
You don't just use a standard yeast for this. And this was another part of the problem why this took so long. It took a while to get this yeast. You use what's called a yeast ball, or it's actually comes in a packet too. It's rice wine yeast, okay? And what this is not just yeast. It's yeast, herbs, and bacteria that help to convert the starches in the rice into sugar. So I see a lot of people making rice wine by boiling rice, and I did it once too. You know, they boil up rice, they take all that liquid and rice, they put that into a bottle, add some yeast, add some sugar, and they get rice wine, right? Well, sort of. They get a ricey flavored wine. It's not really rice wine because really their fermentable was the sugar. Maybe a little bit of the starches, but yeast has a tough time with that. If they had used this kind of yeast, they might have gotten something like rice wine, but adding the sugar just boosts the alcohol. Ours doesn't use any sugar.
So to start off, we prepped our rice by rinsing it thoroughly.
Most places say rinse 3 times, that sort of thing. We ran it under water for a while until the water ran clear.
Now there's various ways of prepping the rice. You can steam it, you can soak it, you can do whatever you want to it. We use the steaming method. So after rinsing it thoroughly, we put it in kind of a double broiler configuration, but it was our...
Essentially a steamer.
Yeah.
What we did is we have a pot, we put a steamer basket in the bottom of that pot, and then put a bowl with the rice and the water in it. Now, something important that we learned is we're using 3 cups of rice, which actually came to 650 grams of rice. I'm using grams because it's easier. The amount of water that you use to steam this rice is 1.2 times the weight. So for us, that was 780 grams. That seemed really important in all the research that I did, that you use the exact right amount of water. Because this is an unusual method, and you're going to see in just a couple of minutes. Sorry for all the preamble here, but this is important because this is such a different method than what we've ever done for any brew on our channel. We wanted to get it right, and we want to explain why it's so different.
So at this point, our rice is done steaming. We steamed it for an hour, and now, as you can see, we have 2 trays. So
Just sheet pans.
I'm going to go get the rice, and we're going to lay it out on the trays to allow it to cool.
It's been sitting in the pot that was steaming because we wanted to keep it warm. This rice, when it starts to dry, gets very sticky first off, and then it gets hard. And we didn't want that to happen until it was already out here because it'd be harder to break it up. All right, notice she's wearing gloves. This is hot. We have too many things getting burned around here lately. So we just want to get that rice out and onto these trays. Oh, wow, they ain't kidding when
Don't touch.
I know. They ain't kidding when they say sticky. All right, so what I'm doing now is just spreading this rice around to get more surface area to it so that it can cool off. We want it to cool off and dry just a little bit. Now, when I say that we're making this the traditional way, I'm making this as close to the traditional way as I've found. We're probably doing something a little bit off the traditional method, but we're trying the best we can to preserve the concept, which is basically they cook the rice, let it air dry a little, spread the yeast on it, then they put it in a fermenter. Now that's just the basics of it, but let's figure this out for a minute. We're not adding liquid, really. We're not taking a hydrometer reading. We're totally in the dark today about ABV. There's just no way to know. I have heard reports, though, of 15 to 25% using this yeast. I can't believe the 25. The 15 I could believe. I could think it's somewhere 15 to 18%, maybe. I don't really know how much sugar is in rice. But that's an interesting thing. We touched on it, but let me explain. Rice does not contain sugar. It contains starches. And this is why I say rice wine's really more like a beer, because the starches cannot be consumed by yeast. Well, not very easily, so they're not going to get to most of it, which means you're not really getting any alcohol if you just add a regular yeast and throw this in a jug. And I'm only saying that because I know someone's going to do that and ask me why it didn't ferment. That's why. If you look at beer, beer's the same way. The malted barley has starches in it, but not a lot of sugars. So you use the mash-in process to extract those starches and convert them into sugars using various enzymes, right? This does the same thing, but it's all in the yeast. Kind of an interesting concept when you really think about it. It's going to convert the starches to sugars so that the yeast can convert that into ethanol and CO2. Okay, so this is sat for probably 15-20 minutes. It's cooled down to a reasonable point for the yeast. And this is where it gets a little bit strange. You're supposed to put some of the yeast right onto the rice now. So I'm just going to use like half a packet spread out over it and literally just sprinkle it over. I had to watch many videos and read several essays, articles, blogs, and whatnot to really believe that this was how they do it, because it just seemed very odd. It didn't seem to make much sense. But after seeing the finished products, I realized that they all came to the same conclusion, even though their methodologies varied very slightly. That's almost half, roughly half. Works for me. Now, we got to get this into this. Now, we're using our little big mouth bubbler again, mostly because it's what we had available, and partially because I wasn't really sure how much rice this was going to be. Easiest way, I think, is going to be to move one of these guys out of the way. Bring in the fermenter and just literally scoop, scrape. I mean, it's like this very gummy, very sticky mass. This is kind of crazy. But they don't call it sticky rice for nothing. You see how it's just sticking together into a mass? It's kind of crazy. It's probably going to take a little while. Okay, you with me so far? This is possibly the weirdest method we've ever used to make wine. Now, obviously, we could have made a lot more, but I'm okay with this. This is a test because we've never done this before, so who knows what it's going to be like. Now, they say once you get all the rice in there to sprinkle the rest of the yeast in. I'm using the whole packet because every video I saw, they pretty much did, and I have 5 of them, so I'm not all that worried. I'd rather use too much in this case than too little. Most that we saw did not add anything to this. That bothers me a little bit. I just can't understand how that's really going to work that well, so I wanted to add a little bit of water. Some did this, but they didn't add a lot. It was mostly just to sort of submerge, something like that. It wasn't even all that much. I mean, we're talking, what is it, like a quart of water in there possibly? And I'm just going to mix this around because I feel like you have to. Okay. That seems to be all we have to do. But I'm going to put the lid on it. Many of the videos used an open mouth container. They might have put cheesecloth or something on it. I'm doing an airlock. We have cats, and nobody wants that you know, spitting out cat hair when they're drinking their wine. So there we go. Okay. You might think that that's the end of the video, but you would be wrong because that's not quite the end yet. We are going to show you what this does in a couple of days. They say it usually takes a few days to really kick off. So we're going to give this a couple days and see what it does. If the airlock starts showing activity though, we will film that and show you. So not quite 24 hours has passed, and we're starting to see some activity in the airlock. It was really weird because it would like show negative pressure, and then positive pressure, then negative pressure. And I think it was just because as the day went on, the rice cooled that much more, and then our house started cooling, so it was this back and forth thing.
So for those of you that don't know what negative pressure means, typically you want to see the activity of your airlock where the gases from your fermentation push the liquid in this chamber and push all the liquid out into this chamber. Negative pressure is when the pressure changes inside your vessel, sucking the liquid out of this chamber and into this chamber.
And that's why we don't suggest using rubbing alcohol in your airlock.
Because if it sucks it too far, that means it's going to end up in your brew, which is bad. But like Brian said, because we had warm rice, well, rice that was warmer than our ambient room temperature, and it cooled, that's more than likely what caused the negative pressure.
But anyway, let's show you this airlock and see if you can see what's happening inside. Okay, so as you can see, it is bubbling. It's not as active as some of them that we've done recently, but that could also be due to the fact that there's a lot of extra space in this particular fermenter. I'm just trying to wait till there's another bubble. Come on, you can do it. See, it's kind of slow. But anyway, if we look down inside, we see some liquid coming up the side just a little bit. That's a little bit more liquid than I put in there because you couldn't really see the liquid I put in yesterday. So it's kind of, this is unique. I don't really know what to make of it. And of course, right as I go away, like 17,000 bubbles just went through the airlock.
And that's another unique attribute to this particular beverage is that rather than just the one steady bubble, we'll have one bubble and then we'll have like 15 bubbles. And I attribute that to the grains of rice blocking the path of the gas. And
I wasn't thinking that's what it is.
It's probably collecting pockets of gas.
And then they release.
And then they release all at once, pushing the airlock forward.
And it could very well be that. I'm thinking it could also be there's so much air in here, and air can be slightly compressible. So the pressure of that water is holding it back, and then when it finally does go, a lot of it goes through at one time. That's kind of what I'm thinking, but it could be a combination of the two. Speaking of that, a lot of people ask all the time, I have all this empty space in my primary fermenter. Is that a problem? No. In primary, not a problem at all. That's why I really wasn't worried about this. I did not know how much this was going to puff up. And it did actually puff slightly. Not as much as we thought it might, because I was afraid this was going to be like up here by today. So we could have put in a couple more cups of rice and, you know, gotten a little bit more out of this, or used a smaller fermenter, but it's okay. This is a learning experience. We've never done a brew like this ever before. So I just thought this is really, really interesting, and let's see how it goes. If you like this video, we have about 300 videos on our channel about winemaking, mead making, beer, and cider making.
Thank you for liking and subscribing.
As always, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.